Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Another episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns, joined as always by BeaverBlitz.com publisher Angie Machado, and in the background, Duke Machado, the resident Damn Podcast canine partner.
Seriously, I shut him out, and then he's a good watchdog. Let me just tell you.
We're here on Monday, November 7th to recap Oregon State's football game against Washington, which went the way of the Huskies 24-21 on Friday. I know we're a couple of days late here in recapping, but between getting back down from Seattle, recovering from a quick illness, and generally, I think just trying to gather our thoughts over the last, 72 hours almost. We took a couple of days to kind of prep for this thing, and we're going to go for quite a while here as we recap the action in what, Angie, I think was probably Oregon State's biggest game of the Jonathan Smith era, and had the potential to be Oregon State's biggest win in about a decade if the Beavers could have pulled it off. But the Beavers do come up short 24-21. We're going to get to pretty much, just about everything we can as far as stats go, the game flow as usual, a couple of injury notes and our keys to the game, but also just the impact that this game might have on the rest of the season, the consequences of losing it, and where this team and fan base and coaching staff are at right now. So, Angie, let me just check in with you now here as we're a couple of days removed from the game. Just, I guess, a couple of thoughts before we really dive into it on how you thought that thing played out.
Yeah, I think early on, I thought Oregon State was dominating. I thought even though the score wasn't showing it, I thought Oregon State was kind of having its way with Washington, able to run the ball at will, was really finding success. Really, I thought a tale of two halves. We can sit and debate whether those should have been field goal attempts or touchdown attempts. You know what? You watch football. I don't know, Carter, if you saw any of the Alabama LSU game.
I did.
But it went into overtime, and Brian Kelly at home decided to go for two, which that was even gutsier. I think, that was way gutsier, because if you lose that, that takes them out of potentially a national title chance. So, that was crazy in my mind, but we can talk all about that. But I did think there's two things, and one's more big picture, one smaller picture. Smaller picture, I do think the Husky coaches outcoached Oregon State coaches in the second half. I thought that the Husky coaches came out with made better adjustments than Oregon State did. Big picture, this team is a good quarterback away from that elite level.
I think that's fair to say, and something that we've kind of debated the last couple of weeks. But now, after 4 starts of the Bengal Branson era, a couple of games of Chance Nolan in the beginning of the year, I think we're at a point now where it's pretty simple to say, yeah, Oregon State's not getting the kind of production it needs out of the most important position on the field. And if it were to get that kind of production, the Beavers could be they could be a one-loss team entering the final quarter of the season, which, shoulda, coulda, woulda, I suppose. But that really is how close this team has come and continues to be to reaching that next level.
And Carter, think back. I was thinking about this yesterday when I wrote She Said. You and I, fall camp, we kept talking about how good the defense was, and then we were kind of like, but remember how much the offense struggled to move the ball, period, like that first scrimmage. Yeah. We just thought, okay, the defense is ahead of the offense. It's all making sense, though, now. Yes, the defense is much improved, but the offense really is just not quite there, and it's quarterback. And it's not going to matter whether it's Bengal Branson, Chance Nolan. This team, I just think, is a good quarterback away from – and you can debate whether they, another wide receiver, an edge rusher. Yes, I agree. But for that next step to happen, to be in that elite, to be up there in that discussion, that's kind of, I think, big picture where we're at right now.
14 offensive points for the Beavers on the road against Washington. 7 via the defense for that 24-21 loss at Husky Stadium. So you drop that game. It's a Friday night. It's a windy, cold, dry, actually, night in Seattle. And it's a game that, I think a lot of Oregon State fans and a couple of us at BeaverBlitz and the whole team expected to go up there and to pull off one of those kind of monumental landmark type wins for Jonathan Smith and company. But you come out with a loss, snaps a 3-game losing streak. It drops you out of the AP top 25. When the college football playoff rankings come out in about 24 hours from now, the Beavers will not be included on that top 25. So it's a short stay in the rankings. It's a short stay in the national picture in that conversation. And now it feels like there's 3 games left in the regular season, and then probably a Sun Bowl appearance, maybe an ESPN Bowl if the Beavers continue to drop. I don't think we're going to go out here and predict the Beavers are going to lose their next 3 games or even 2 of them. I think the future is still bright in the immediate aftermath of this loss, but it feels like a lot of the glow of what Oregon State has built to this point has kind of dimmed.
Yeah, I think that, that's the greatest way of saying it, Carter. It's the season. It could still be a very, very special season. Right now you're sitting at 6 wins. Get a couple more. If it's an 8-win season, 9-win season with a bowl. So, we say that the Washington game was the biggest. If they're somehow able to eke out a win over Oregon, that would be right up there. But just so close on some of these. Yet I guess it smacked me in the face when I was watching a game. I think it might have been the USC Cal game on Saturday night, and they popped up the top teams, and it was Washington in that last spot and not Oregon State. So we are, Oregon State now is back to being the also-ran and just again losing that momentum. We talked about that last week about finally getting ranked, finally the needing to take that next step to stay ranked and move forward and not getting it done. So.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about with that graphic. It was the top 5 teams in the Pac-12. You would have seen Oregon State right there had the Beavers won. And then they flash, the best wins and worst losses for all of the contenders in the Pac-12. And USC pops up. And there you see best win, Oregon State. Like the Beavers are just right there on the edge of this conversation. And a win like that over Washington would have cemented them in the conversation, in the race for not necessarily the Pac-12 title, but for prominence in this conference. It does have the feeling of a really disappointing loss. So looking forward, the next 3 weeks of the regular season, we're going to wrap this thing up in less than a month now. It's flown by, but do you have this feeling of, man, what's Oregon State playing for right now? Like you mentioned, a special season is still on the table, but the expectations going in were to win the Pac-12 title. The expectations midway through the year were, all right, we're going to compete to the very end for this thing. We're going to pick up some big wins along the way. And now none of that is really on the table anymore. So I don't know if I'm necessarily worried, but I concern a little bit about, is this fan base going to check out? Are some of the guys in the locker room maybe going to check out? I worry less about that than the fan base. But after a loss like that, and with the stakes being quite a bit lower the rest of the way, it does have a little bit of that "what are we playing for" feel.
Yeah, because what is the benefit? You went out and you're at the Sun Bowl.
Yeah.
I don't. So Beavs are going to be helped. This weekend is Parents' Weekend. So I know it's already a sellout. So that'll help. Although a late night game, it'll be interesting to see who actually shows up, or not a late night, but a 6 o'clock game won't be over till 9:30, 10. It'll be interesting to see if that crowd sticks around, how rowdy they are. Then Oregon, if Oregon State can somehow win the next 2 games, I think that Oregon game is a big one, and Oregon always is. But if they somehow drop one of these, I can see that being a game that maybe some tickets start hitting the secondary market, because Beaver fans just kind of, like you said, check out.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of hard to pump yourself up for a game against Cal. It's going to be hard to pump yourself up for a road game against ASU, which has kind of fallen off this year. But like you said, if the Beavs do go 2-0 these next 2 weeks, and maybe Oregon drops the game to Utah or to Washington, all of a sudden you're going to have 2 very similar teams with two very similar records coming in to this rivalry matchup to close out the regular season. And I think that's what can re-energize the fan base and re-energize the team and get Oregon State back into this national picture. But for the short term, it's just not going to be there.
Well, yeah, I think I called it in an email I sent out to the Blitz staff today, a soul crushing loss. It did feel kind of like you got sucker punched, because right down to the very end, and it's a hard one to put, and we'll go game, or through the game, but gosh, Carter, I mean, like I said, for probably 3/4 of the game, it felt like Oregon State, even though they weren't playing great, could eke it out. And then even the strength of the team, the defense really struggled there in that fourth quarter, giving up lots of third down conversions. I think they were 62% giving up third down conversions. That's very uncharacteristic. Now, to be fair, and if you watch the you were there, but ESPN had a major love affair with Michael Penix Jr. Like,
I heard.
Gosh, like, I'm surprised that he's not like the first round draft pick, because the way they talked about him. Good quarterback, don't get me wrong, but yeah, he did pull some magic out of his hat. And yeah, I see a comment here. Brian Miller says, "I'm guessing that they were tired." And it was dark. It was just kind of everything that was going on. But uncharacteristic. And when they went down and scored that last touchdown, that kind of seemed almost like a nail in the coffin.
Yeah, soul crushing it's an apt way to put it. I think the fan base and everyone who's around this team too could feel it. It was just like borderline depressing to lose a game where you feel like, man, there's so much on the table. And we knew that this was going to be a possibility coming in, because like we said, Oregon State hasn't played a game of this caliber this late in the season in a long time. This is all part of that process of building up. You want to have losses like this that sting. Obviously, you don't want to lose the games, but if you're going to lose them, you want them to hurt, because that means you're playing for something. And that means it means something. It's just part of the growing pains of this program and this team's trajectory.
Now, I think you'll agree with me, Carter, but if this would have happened to the team maybe last year or the year before, I would have worried about the team psyche. Mm-hmm. I don't, because I think the veteran leadership are going to get these guys back right, focused, and ready. I mean, Cal and ASU, say what you will. I mean, they aren't great teams right now, but they're still throwing punches.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look at what Cal did against USC this past weekend. Gave the Trojans a scare for sure. Yeah. I mean, put up a bunch of points there. But you want to dive right into this thing? Should we?
Let's just do it.
Yeah, we've talked big picture a lot, but we need to highlight how this game played out, because in so many different ways. I mean, there are so many different things we can dive into here. A game where a lot went well and a lot didn't, and I think all of that deserves to be highlighted. So let's start with a look through the stat book. So Oregon State obviously comes up short on the scoreboard, 21-24, but the yardage totals I think tell a more well-rounded story of just really how unable Oregon State was to move the ball in this game. I mean, the 21 points look great, but only 14 of those came from the offensive side. And a lot of that is because the Beavers were outgained 398-262. And if you are only picking up 262 yards against a Pac-12 team in a conference game in the month of November, you are going to lose 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, especially only scoring 14 points. I mean, that's huge. I mean, you can't count on pick sixes every week. So, that's another stat, though, then flipping it around to something good, was that 398 that you would dub, because the defense had a really pretty decent game when you look at that number, because they had been close to 600 average before this game.
Yeah, you got to take this thing with a grain of salt, I suppose, because 398 may not look great, but I mean, against the number one passing offense, but against the number one passing offense in the country, to hold Michael Penix Jr. to 298, like, that doesn't sound great, but it's solid. And the Beavers showed a lot of flashes. I think, in pass defense. Let's talk about the run game, though, because this was really the only thing Oregon State had going for it offensively. On the defensive side, the Beavers did a great job. They held Washington to 100 yards. We didn't expect the Huskies to run the ball a ton, but that makes it 4 consecutive opponents at or below 100 yards. 4.2 yards per carry, that's a solid number. You'll take that. But then on the flip side, it really was the only thing the Beavers could do, and it started with Damian Martinez again.
Yeah, 82 yards in the first half, 74 in the first quarter. I think I texted you in the first quarter, and I was feeling pretty good. Just how we were, Oregon State was able just to run, like I said, at will against the Huskies.
Look at the first 6 carries for Damian Martinez too. He goes 11 yards, then 9, then 9, then 10, then 9, then 26. And those first 2 drives, man, I said, man, if Oregon State can move the ball like this, Washington does not stand a chance, because the Beavers, the key for the Beavers in this game, we talked about the weather being a factor and a redshirt freshman quarterback in a hostile environment. The key was always for the Beavers to be able to move the ball on the ground. And the way they did it in the first 2 drives, and they scored a touchdown on the first one, it just felt like, man, if Oregon State can keep this up, they could roll here. And of course, the rest is history. They didn't keep it up. But credit to Damian Martinez for coming out with his hair on fire in his first career start and putting up 82 yards in the first half, like you said, 74 in the first quarter, and making it look like Oregon State was going to come away with this thing with a bunch of points. Yeah, no, it was. And then I was a little, I was bummed for Damian though, because he got the Beavs down there twice, and then they went ahead and let Deshaun Fenwick bust it in. Yeah, Fenwick had the 2 touchdowns, which, when you think about it, I mean, the guy touched the ball 5 times in this game, had 37 yards and 2 scores. That's pretty efficient. And efficiency isn't necessarily the name of the game with Deshaun Fenwick. He's more of a volume guy. But that was an efficient game. And to score 2 times, and the way he did it on that second one in the Wildcat was pretty impressive too. But how about Jam Griffin? Yes. Who sneakily had a solid game. He was the second leading rusher on the team by volume and yardage. He took 8 carries for 38 yards. It's, we talk about the depth of this room. Man, if Damian Martinez wasn't in the mix, I think we'd be talking about Jam Griffin as being a pretty solid RB1. He had a quietly good game, and the running game all around. Yeah. For as little as it did in the second half, it was still a pretty good game by all accounts for those 3 guys. That's where Washington made adjustments. So Washington was like, okay, I mean, when you become one-dimensional, it's gonna I think he did find the best running back rotation, but Oregon State cannot afford to be one-dimensional, and that's what happens when it happens. Because then I look down, the next offensive stat we're going to look at is passing yards, and Oregon State had 87. That's not going to get it done in the Pac-12. Anywhere. I mean, it's not going to get it anywhere. On 12 of 19 passing, 63%. I mean, you look at that and that's okay. That's solid. That's a fine number for a Pac-12 quarterback, but it was just incredibly inefficient. And that's what the metrics love about Chance Nolan, is that he's a very efficient quarterback. He doesn't need a whole lot of attempts and a whole lot of completions to rack up yardage and touchdowns. Ben Gulbranson, being the game manager type quarterback that he is, this is the kind of stat line you can see from him. I think back to 2 years ago, the last time Oregon State played at Husky Stadium, the score is very similar. It was 1 in the low 20s. You had Tristan Gebbia out there, another game managing quarterback. He was held under 100 passing yards, and the Beavers lost a close one. And, both times it was just the lack of a passing game felt like the one thing that held the Beavers back. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, Angie. How much, because we've talked about Oregon State being a quarterback away, how much was on Gulbranson? How much was on the rest of the offense? Because Gulbranson did his part in completing the passes that he threw, but the yardage and the scores were not there. Yeah, I think, and to his credit too, I don't think that Oregon State offensive line, which we rave about, and I think they are a elite run blocking O-line, I don't think they did an amazing job pass protection this week. So give some, blame to them. There were a couple wide open passes that just, whether the wind picked them up, whether the receiver just didn't get to them, there were a couple that I just stand out to me. But again, then you have to give credit to Washington's defense, because they basically dared Oregon State to throw, and they still couldn't complete passes. That's the blueprint to beating Oregon State right now. Until Oregon State can prove that it'll move the ball with consistency through the air, you have to dare them to pass it. You got to load the box. And teams early on in the season did that, and Chance Nolan made them pay. But I don't think we've seen Ben Gulbranson make teams pay for that type of game plan.
No, not at all. And so there's like, I was thinking about this the other day, and how do you kind of combat that? If you're Brian Lindgren, because I know in BeaverBlitz and the Lodge, there's been a lot of discussion about, is it time to change O coordinators? I don't think we're there. I mean,
No.
I think Brian Lindgren is a smart offensive coordinator. I think he's super creative, and I love the creativity. What I would like to see, since we are seeing quarterbacks struggle, we're seeing pass protection maybe not being the best as that it could be. We need to see, and this is what Washington did really well, were some of those little dink and dunk passes to get things going. Fly sweep. This is where Mike Riley kind of brought this in to kind of help when you didn't have great receivers, or you bring in a fly sweep, but you have to run that fly motion more than twice a game. You run it whether you're running a fly sweep or not. You put a guy in motion just to keep teams off balance. So there's a lot of different things I'd like to see Oregon State do to maybe help get that passing game and to back defenses up a little bit. But I am not in the camp that Brian Lindgren needs to go. I think back to having Kim Grinolds on Thursday from Dogman, and him talking about Jonathan Smith being kind of the pinata back in the day. And I feel that Lindgren is right now kind of the pinata around Oregon State. And I don't necessarily think that's warranted.
Yeah, fair or not, I don't necessarily think that that Brian Lindgren is the end all be all of Oregon State's offensive struggles right now. You can always blame the play caller. You can always blame the guy who's in charge of recruiting the guys who are maybe not performing at a high enough level. But some of it does come down to execution at the end of the day. And we have seen that rear its head this year for sure. I do think, again, going back to Thursday's discussion, Brian Lindgren has some shortcomings, whether it's play calling and changing things up when one thing's going really well, or overthinking things. But man, the flashes that he shows in play calling sometimes. We talked about the Deshaun Fenwick touchdown run. I mean, to line Coletto up and then to shift him over, use him as a lead blocker, and give the ball to Fenwick, like that is prime Brian Lindgren, Jonathan Smith offense right there. And it scored Oregon State points. So for as many frustrations as there may be, Brian Lindgren is not the only problem with Oregon State's offense right now. He could very well be one of them. And I guess at this point we have to say that he is, because he has cost Oregon State a couple of times, but he is not the reason Oregon State lost this game. And in my opinion, it's just the fact that Oregon State doesn't have great quarterback play, which again does come back to Lindgren, but he's not the only guy recruiting quarterbacks, and he's not the only one, who's responsible for the way they play. There are other pieces that need to be addressed as well. And I don't think that firing Brian Lindgren is going to change some of this stuff.
And that goes right back to probably my biggest disappointment so far of this year because of the quarterback play is I honestly thought with Coach Smith and Coach Lindgren kind of leading that quarterback, recruiting the quarterback room, that recruiting would have been better than it is at this point in the program.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we'll probably talk quite a bit about in the offseason is, all right, well, what can Oregon State do to elevate its play offensively right away? Transfer portal quarterback comes to mind. But, I do think you have to look – I think you have to take another look at the offense and say, how can we move the ball when we're not handing it off to Damian Martinez?
Okay, so think about this.
Talk about the playbook up. Do you call plays that you haven't done before? Like, what do you do? This is the offseason where the money is going to be made for Brian Lindgren, because before he has been leading prolific offenses, and some of the criticisms have been, like they left a few points on the board. Well, so what? They scored 35. This is the year where it's cost them. And so this is the make or break offseason for Lindgren. He's not at a point of being fired right now, but if he does it again next year, if he can't fix the problems that we saw this year, that's when we start to have the discussion. Yeah.
And something to think about. So, we are in an age of transfer portal. Okay. Especially at quarterback. So thinking about the top teams in the conference, Oregon has a brand new transfer quarterback. Utah has a transfer quarterback, has been in the system for a couple of years. UCLA has a guy that's been in the program like 10 years, but Washington has a transfer. Washington State has a transfer. Arizona has a transfer. Cal has a transfer. ASU has a transfer. I mean, really, the only schools that do not currently have a transfer QB at the helm is Oregon State, Stanford, and Colorado.
To be fair, Chance Nolan did transfer in from junior college, but to your point, that's it's different. That's not
different.
That's not the point you're making here.
Yeah.
JT Daniels playing at Oregon State would fit that mold of what you're talking
I
about.
wonder if he's having second thoughts now that he's been benched and life isn't so good. I mean, I think about if he would have chose Oregon State and led them to maybe some bigger thing. I mean, you can sit and second guess all you want, but I'm just wondering what his thought process is now.
Yeah, we could second guess the Beavers being undefeated if JT Daniels was the quarterback in this offense right now. Speaking of the offense, turnovers, not a problem in this game. The Beavers did fumble on the hook and ladder play at the end of the game, but that was their only turnover of the game. Ben Gulbranson just kind of fumbled an exchange on that first drive, but the Beavers recovered. So turnovers not a factor in Oregon State not being able to score, which that was kind of the bugaboo early on in the year. Now it's just, they're inefficient, they're ineffective. But defensively, how about the turnover that Oregon State forced? Easton Mascarenas Arnold, 37-yard pick six, felt like it could be a game-changing play. And at the time, it kind of was because the Beavers needed points before the break.
It really kind of negated those two missed potential field goals.
Totally.
The Beavers. So you're like, okay, that makes up for that. Before Oregon State really went completely dry.
Totally did. One more stat category to highlight before we do some game flowy type stuff and keys to the game. Pass rush and run defense. The tackles for loss, the sacks, the quarterback hurries, just not even remotely there for Oregon State. And I think that is, we can look to third down defense. We can look to the lack of a passing game. But man, the fact that Oregon State could not pressure Michael Penix Jr., one of the key factors in costing Oregon State this game.
And that was both our key to the game.
Yeah.
For this game. And they didn't. And Smith addressed that a little today and just kind of said, well, we want to, they had some good receivers and we didn't want to, necessarily leave them open and leave the back end by bringing more people. But it would have been nice to get a little more pressure on him because the plays they did get a little pressure on him, he made bad decisions and had to throw the ball away.
But when they did get pressure, it wasn't even enough to like log something in the stat book. They had no sacks, no official quarterback hurries. You got the 2 tackles for loss, which was indicative of Oregon State stepping up in the run game, which it has for the last few weeks. And it's funny, we talk about the run defense now, like once a week in discussion. Like this is not even. For so many years, it was, man, if Oregon State can improve in the run game on defense, like it'll get over the hump. Here we are. They've arrived.
Yeah.
So those 2 tackles for loss show up there for sure. But man, the Beavers just could not get to Penix, and I think that cost them some points, especially on those drives where the Huskies were picking up third downs and moving the ball with 10+ play drives. That's the kind of time when you need to get some pressure there.
Yeah.
On the other side, protection. I thought was you talked about it not being great. I thought it was okay. 3 tackles for loss and 1 sack with no quarterback hurries. You look at the guys who are rushing Gulbranson, who we hyped up as the best edge rushers Oregon State will see this year. 1 sack and no quarterback hurries, you'll take it. It's not like Gulbranson was like entirely comfortable back there, but they didn't get home, which is I guess really all you can ask for.
And I think part of it too is just Gulbranson still learning his comfort. And learning to find his comfort spot in the pocket. So maybe he looks a little more frazzled than maybe a more veteran quarterback would.
We're going to move on to the game flow section of this podcast. But first, I mean, Angie, the discussions that we've had in the first half of this episode have been going on nonstop since game day in the lodge at BeaverBlitz. I mean, the discussions between fans and the members at BeaverBlitz has just been off the charts all year, but especially after losses like this, it can get heated at times, but the analysis is great. And for fan analysis, I mean, I can't think of a better place to go than, I guess maybe Twitter, but BeaverBlitz is the most like knowledgeable discussion you're going to have with
we have
fans.
Former coaches, we have former players, former parents. I'm a member at some boards on other platforms, free, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram type things. And to see kind of the misinformation there, like, fans that think that, and I'm just like, so bad. I want to be just like, either set them straight or say, just get to the lodge, because so much, I just want to say thank you to the lodge members, because your insight is very intelligent.
We still continue to smash numbers in the subscription space at BeaverBlitz, and we're getting there on YouTube as well. Thank you to everyone who is watching us live right now. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. Please help us get us there. Maybe by Thanksgiving. I mean,
Okay.
it's a landmark. We're trying hard to get there, and we're trying to up our content game on YouTube to warrant those subscription numbers. So if you're watching us live right now on the damn podcast on YouTube, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We would appreciate it a lot.
Have your friends hit it too. It's easy. And it's free on YouTube.
All right. Game flow.
Okay.
Oregon State starts on a positive note and scored one of its 2 offensive touchdowns right off of the bat. Deshaun Fenwick punches it in from 3 yards out, but it was everything that led up to that made me think, wow, Oregon State could be onto something here offensively against not a great, but a solid defensive team in Washington with Damian Martinez's 39 rushing yards on the first drive.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, like I said, I think I texted you up in Seattle that first drive and was like, okay, this is good. I'm feeling good. And you, I think, wrote back, it's a long game.
Yeah.
So no, it was everything you really wanted to see, we saw. And those long runs, especially out the gate when, Washington should be fresh and ready to go. I was really impressed with what we saw.
It just wasn't sustainable, though, unfortunately, for Oregon State, because I think obviously Washington made some adjustments, but like you said, no, the Beavers got exactly what they wanted on that first drive. Defensively, a strong start too. You forced Washington to punt just shy of midfield, and it was a shanked punt because, again, the weather was such a discussion point going into this game. Anytime a team was marching towards the lake, wind was a factor, and we saw that rear its head in multiple areas, but particularly on special teams. Washington shanked a couple of punts, and it happened on its very first drive with an 18-yard punt to the Oregon State 30. Field position wasn't necessarily a huge factor in this thing because neither team was scoring a ton, but I mean, that's kind of where the weather played a factor in this game.
And we're gonna on Oregon State's next possession. This is one of the stalled drives.
Yeah.
I will say weather played a factor too, because the field seemed slippery for some
Yeah.
reason. Coletto slipped on his lead block on the 4th down play. It's like he lost his footing, but we saw guys losing their footing kind of throughout the game. So weather played more of a role than I think we thought, we knew going in, but I think seeing that it wasn't raining, I thought, okay, maybe this will be better. But the wet field, the wind, I think it all played a little bit of not a huge part, but it played a part.
All right, so let's talk about that turnover on downs there, because you mentioned Coletto slipping. He was supposed to be the lead blocker on a 3rd down play. On a 3rd and 1, he slipped. The guy that he was assigned to came in and stopped the Oregon State ball carrier, who I think was Fenwick on that play.
Yeah.
For no gain, which brings up 4th down, and then Coletto himself is stopped.
Yes.
For no gain on a 4th and long 1. So this is the 4th down where, you're at the Washington 7. It's a chip shot field goal. You're not even kicking into the wind. You feel good about Everett Hayes and his ability to make that. But that's one of those 4th downs where I think we look back on it even after the game and say, man, the Beavers wanted those 3 points in hindsight, but we're okay with them going for it there because you have Jack Coletto, because it's a 4th and 1. Like, you feel confident with that, like 9.5 times out of 10.
Exactly. Jack Coletto, he's 95%, 98% from, those types of plays.
So I think in hindsight, fans are saying, man, if we kick it both of those times, we probably win this game. Well, yeah, but again, aggressiveness is Oregon State's MO. Analytically, it's probably the smart call there. I don't have a problem with that one. We'll get to the second one in just a minute, and I think that one in hindsight we might have put on our coaching caps and said, hey, let's try something else there. But
how many times, Carter? We don't have it down here, and I didn't look. How many times has Coletto been stopped on like a 1.5 yard Not many.
Yeah, not many. I can think of maybe 2, maybe 3 all
Yeah.
year. Um, but yeah, we'll move to the second quarter
Okay.
here. Washington shanks another punt. So again, it's the special teams are being impacted by the weather, and Oregon State gets the ball at the Washington 33. Prime opportunity for the Beavers to score. You're thinking, man, they caught a break here. This is your opportunity. Now you missed an opportunity to go up 2 scores. You get the ball back. You have a short field to work with. You have to get points on this drive, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's when the second, I guess we will call this one a questionable decision.
Yeah,
This
because
is when the questionable one comes. Oregon State turns it over on Washington's 15, an
15.
incomplete pass on 4th and 3. So let me ask you this, Angie. The offense comes onto the field. You see they're not going to kick what would have been probably a 28-ish yard
Mhm.
field goal. Were you disappointed before you saw the play? Were you disappointed or excited to see the offense go back out there? Because I thought it was questionable in the moment.
I thought it was questionable in the moment. But I was kind of like, okay, I mean, I get it. You're trying to make up now for a missed just, 10 minutes ago, your last possession. So I we'll get to it now because I was more disappointed that was the play call they went with. The
Yeah.
naked boot to the running back.
Yeah, it was a naked to Damian Martinez who was kind of streaking towards the end zone. That front pylon there in the corner, and it was overthrown. It was going to be a tough play to complete, anyways. He had a guy uh, less than a step behind him. I think if you're going for it on 4th and 3, there, you just you rely on your offensive line to push it. You go something quick over the middle.
Yeah.
I don't love the play call. But that's the one where I say, okay, sure, you're kicking into the wind. Sure, Everett Hayes is coming back from an injury, but man, the worst
Yeah.
that's going to happen is you're not going to score. And that's to be fair to Jonathan Smith, that's the thought process behind going for it. Worst case, you don't
Yeah.
score. The 3 points isn't guaranteed anyways. But I don't know. I looked at that in the moment, and I look back on it now, and I said that's 3 points that the Beavers should have had, want to have, needed to have, and that's the play call that
Especially with
I
3
didn't love.
yards. It
I
wasn't like
didn't love.
it wasn't 4th and 1 where
Right.
maybe you try again. It was 3, maybe a long 3 at the 15. And at that point you want to be up by 2 scores. And okay, you miss a field goal, but nobody's questioning that down the stretch. You at least tried for more, but and especially, if I'm looking at analytics, even that's like the big buzzword now. I can't even tell you how many times I heard analytics between NFL and college games this week. Oregon State's red zone offense started off okay, but it hasn't been as good against better defensive teams. So I almost think you're better off trying to kick the field goal, go up by 2 scores, and keep some momentum going that way.
It really has fallen off. And from just a philosophy standpoint, anytime you're in 4th and 2 or shorter with Jack Coletto on your team, I'm okay with you going for it.
Seriously,
I
yeah,
really don't even care where you are in the field. You have to have that much trust in the guy at this point that
yeah,
you could be on your own 40 in a 4th and 1.5,
yeah,
and I would not be surprised if you put Coletto out there and he got it. So like
yeah,
that's most of the time I don't question it, but 4th and 3 when you're in field goal range,
yeah.
I that had field goal written all over it. But we got to move on. I mean, that's been one of the points
That's the
of
biggest discussion. Yeah,
and I think you and I are both on board there. The first one was okay. The second one, you'd like to see Everett Hayes and the
yeah,
field goal team come out. So that opens up the door for Washington then, because you're looking at a game that could have been 21-0, could have been 13-0 had you taken advantage of your opportunities. But now it's still
still
7-0. It's a
7-0.
1-score game, and then Wayne Talapapa scores a 2-yard touchdown, ties it up at 7
Yeah.
on a 15-play, 85-yard, 6.5-minute drive, which was emblematic of some of the defensive struggles that Oregon State had in this game. The multiple 3rd and longs,
Yeah.
a 4th and long that were converted on the drive. How much did you think that played into Oregon State losing this game? Not even just this drive in particular, but the 3rd down defense all game long.
Yeah, that was the start, and it was almost like that right there, that drive was the change in momentum.
Yeah.
Because before that point, it felt like Oregon State, even though they came away empty from those 2 red zone possessions, they still felt like, okay, Oregon State's still kind of going to roll. And then it just kind of was like Oregon State's defense let up a couple times too many, and then it was like whole new ball game. And Washington, you could just see the life kind of re-energized on their sideline.
And then it was taken away a couple of minutes later by Easton Mascarenas-Arnold, who had that
Yes.
37-yard pick six, like we talked about. Kind of an uncharacteristic play for Michael Penix Jr., who has been incredible at holding onto the ball, particularly with how much Washington throws it this year. I think he'd only thrown like 3 interceptions. Had one of the best touchdown to interception ratios in the country. But Easton kind of steps in front of a pass over the middle. I don't know if Penix missed him or if he didn't think Easton was going to be able to get there in time, but he steps in front of it. And then, to his credit, a pretty nice return, too,
Yeah.
to weave through defenders there at the end and kind of sneak through a couple of guys to the end zone. 14-7 with 1:10 left in the half, knowing that Washington's going to get the ball out of the break. It felt like a big time for the Beavers to score and to get a lead back that they felt like they probably should have had all first half.
Exactly. And like I said, that my feeling watching it was like, okay, that makes up for Oregon State's two misses and are not going for field goals. Okay, we're back in business now.
That brings us to the end of the first half. It's 14-7 Beavers. And at that point, I'm like, we expected Oregon State to have the lead after the way those first couple of drives played out. 7 points wasn't as large as we thought, but I mean, I think at that point, the way it played out, you're happy to have the lead. Defensively, they come out strong, force a 3-and-out. Then the Beavs go 3-and-out. And so you're like, all right, this thing's kind of crawling now. And then Washington, it struck again. And this was the touchdown where I was like, okay, the Huskies aren't going anywhere. They're playing to win this game. Oregon State's not going to have an easy win like we thought it might after the way it moved the ball the first couple of possessions. And again, the way Washington scored on this drive was indicative of some of the struggles the Beavers had. Uncharacteristically blown coverage from the secondary. Jack Westover on a 3rd and goal from the 24 gets behind Rajon Wright, gets behind the safeties, and is wide open in the end zone.
He was wide open.
And we're saying, how does that happen against the best secondary in the Pac-12?
So was that Ryan Cooper, I think, that maybe missed that assignment?
No, it was Rajon.
Okay.
The nice thing about sitting up in the press box at Husky Stadium, which is on the 8th floor, it's about as high up as it gets as far as press boxes go in the Pac-12. You get the all 22 on every play. You can see everything that happens. You could see like 5 miles down across the lake if you wanted to. And what happened on that play was Washington the Huskies do this thing offensively that messed with Oregon State a couple of times, and they shift multiple guys right before the snap. Oftentimes in Oregon State's offense, you'll see maybe the running back go from one side of the quarterback to the other, or maybe a receiver starts in the slot and goes out wide. But you don't see the wholesale formation changes like you saw in Washington's offense, and that happened on that play. And I don't know if Oregon State was in zone. It looked like they were in zone the way that Wright let the guy go by him. But they put 3 receivers to the right of the O-line, and Oregon State only had 2 guys covering them. And so it was kind of a scramble at the end, and Westover ended up behind Wright.
Okay. Yeah, I saw him blast past Wright, and then I saw Cooper trying to make up the safety, but it was too late.
Oregon State did respond to that, to the Beavers' credit. Felt like we were going to be in for a dogfight from that point forward, with Deshaun Fenwick scoring the 19-yard touchdown that we talked about earlier. It's a great play design. I said after that play, man, Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren have to be like internally smiling, celebrating. They're not going to show it. Lindgren might in the box, but Smith certainly wouldn't on the field. That was one of those, okay, we've had that in our back pocket all season, and we just used it to perfection. But the play was set up by a key penalty for Washington on 3rd down. They actually sacked Ben Gulbranson, but they pulled his face mask. And so, the Beavers catch a break there, but to their credit, they take advantage of it with that drive staying alive, and they score off of it. The lead didn't last very long. Taulapapa scored his 2nd touchdown of the game to tie it up at 21. And then, Angie, the lights turned off.
Yeah.
And it literally happened. So if you weren't at the stadium, you don't necessarily get the full experience here. They set the fireworks off right after Taulapapa crossed the end zone, and the second those things exploded, the lights turned off. And I thought, wait, okay, is this one of those, like, we've got LED lights, we turn the lights off to
like
celebrate touchdowns kind of thing? But then I remembered, wait, they've been on all game. 20 minutes later, we're still waiting for these things to turn back on. On the TV broadcast side, what did they do during that? Because on the field, the guys were just kind of warming up. They were talking. They treated it, as Jake Levengood said, like another halftime period. But what was the viewing experience like at home, and how much do you think maybe that impacted the remaining 10 minutes of this game, and as far as guys locking up, cooling down?
They talked a lot about that on the broadcast and how either team would kind of respond. I did think it would be like another halftime, and I thought it would be a good chance to maybe get that defense, to regroup, maybe kind of tighten some things up. But they showed them kind of out doing their stretching and tried to talk. It was a lot of Penix, and you could tell that this crew had just sat and talked with the Washington coaches more, because it was a lot of Washington talk and Kalen DeBoer and, like I said, Penix. It was the Michael Penix show. I mean, it was they did talk a little bit about Damian Martinez, but no, it was interesting, and it did feel like, okay, Washington just took momentum. And I thought, okay, one of two things. Washington has momentum now, but which team is going to come up fired up, ready to go?
Great point by Brian in the YouTube chat. I thought during that, the guys said they treated it like a halftime. I said, this is a really interesting opportunity for teams to make in-game adjustments, because you never have 20 minutes after the third quarter to say, all right, here's what they did in the locker room. Here's what we need to do to adjust to it. It's normally, all right, this was the first half, we're going to adjust to it. We'll see how they do it, and we'll go from there. But it created another in-game chess match between the coaches. And ultimately, I felt like that was where Washington really won this game, was the adjustments that they made to completely take Oregon State's offense out of it, for the rest of the fourth quarter, but also to put together a game plan where you could go later on in the game and put 18 plays together against this Oregon State defense and score a game-winning touchdown. So, and
I agree. I mean, that's where I said I think Oregon State coaches got out-coached, out-schemed. But didn't that last drive feel like last year's game in Corvallis, where Oregon State did that, where they marched down the field, score the field goal to win the game?
Yeah, it totally did. But before that, one play that I want to highlight too. We talked about the wind. The wind really started circling and kind of whipping and doing some really weird things during that timeout for the lights. Okay. So I'll reveal the curtains a little bit here. So in the press box, this is an open air press box at Husky Stadium. Don't get me started. And all game long, the wind had just been going, kind of this way. I'm motioning on screen if you're not watching, across the windows. Okay. But then when the lights turned off, it started blowing into the windows. And I said, okay, so the wind has shifted. It's doing something that it hasn't all game. And sure enough, on that first drive, after the wind shifted, we see it knock down a pass that could have resulted in like a 60-yard touchdown for Oregon State. Anthony Gould got behind the defense. Gulbranson, again, this is where, that all 22 view from the press box comes in play. You might not have seen it on the broadcast, but Gulbranson put that ball on the money. But at the very last second, it kind of blew towards midfield, and you saw Gould kind of like, woo, out of his route. And it tailed off, and it fell for an incompletion. But when the ball left his hands, I said, this is a touchdown. Yeah. Like, Gould's going to the house 60 yards. Oregon State's going to get a huge momentum changing play here, take the lead. That was the play that, to me, we saw the wind impact the game the most. Yeah. And unfortunately, it went against Oregon State's favor. Yeah. And that they tried to highlight that, but I would have liked to have seen that from the air, because they never had a good angle. But the announcers did say, wow, that ball left his hand. It was on the money. Mm-hmm. And the wind, they said, it just picked it right up and just carried it probably 5 to 7 yards toward midfield. I've never seen anything like it. No, I mean, at least live, I've never seen a ball be that impacted by the weather. And it's unfortunate too, because like I said, I mean, he had that thing on the money. Gould had a beeline to the end zone, and we could be talking about a different result if Oregon State connects. A couple of stalled drives, and then Washington again with that 18-play, 92-yard drive over 4 minutes and 25 seconds of game action to score the game-winning field goal. Very, very reminiscent of how this game ended last year at Reser Stadium, with the Beavers coming out on the winning side, but just a crushing blow for Oregon State to lose in that fashion on the 22-yard field goal.
Yeah, it was. What was the mood? I know we have video of the post game, but just in that moment, what was it? Quiet? Was it somber? What was post game?
Yeah, really quiet. Some shouting in the locker room, just general displeasure. It's not like guys were like getting into it with each other. But from what I could hear down the hallway, it was really quiet, and then every now and then you'd hear like an expletive shouted out, or like a "come on," that kind of thing. Just a frustrated and somber locker room, I think, is kind of the vibe I got from post game. And especially too with the two guys that we spoke to post game, Jake Leffengood and Omar Spates. It's the short one sentence answer.
Yeah, they're not going to talk, even if it was a win. They're not going to say much.
Yeah, I think that stung in the locker room pretty hard, for sure. Let's turn things around and talk about what went well for Oregon State. We talked about Damian Martinez. This is the third game in a row the guy's gone for over 100 yards. I mean, he's arrived. He's the guy. There's no more, okay, let's give it to Deshaun Fenwick 20 times. Like, Damian Martinez is the guy. 3 straight games above 100 yards. I want to congratulate you, Angie, on saying that he would be the starting running back before the season was over. It took
longer than I thought.
What are we, 9 games in? Yeah, it took 9 games to do it, but he did get the start.
Because I said 3. Friday. I was maybe being a little overzealous. I also said 10-2 record. So, you win some, you lose some.
Yeah. Pass defense, for a couple of the breakdowns that had,
yes.
I was thoroughly impressed with what Oregon State did for most of that game.
Hey, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was Alex Austin almost had another pick 6.
Yep.
During that game.
Yeah, on a play that was initially ruled dead afterwards. I mean, it was ruled dead because he dropped it, but that would have been called back for a penalty against Oregon State that they actually overturned upon review. So, again, another play that, man, if Oregon State makes that, we're probably talking about a different result. But I want to go back to, well, first of all, the pick 6. This is back-to-back games with a pick 6 for Oregon State for the first time in 9 years, but also the pass breakups. So, the passing yards were always going to be there for Washington. They were always going to move the ball. It's the pass breakups and the interceptions, I think, that tell the bigger story on how just how dominant Oregon State's secondary is. But there was one series where Washington had the ball kind of midway through Oregon State's territory. They're at like the 33, and Jaden Grant breaks up a pass. And then on the next play, Rajon Wright breaks up a pass. Yes. And then on the next play, Alex Austin breaks up a pass. And I sat there and I thought, man, what did I say all week? Penix looks one way and he sees an all-conference guy, and he looks the other and he sees another, and he goes over the top against the safety and he finds another, and it played out on that drive. And then just like that, on 4th and long, they convert. And I said, man, that was a missed opportunity for Oregon State. Yeah.
And you were right, because we talked about that Thursday with Kim, and Kim kind of was talking up Washington's pass, or Washington's pass offense, and you said, you're like, yeah, well, you're going to look at Rajon Wright, but then if you go away from him, you're going to have Alex Austin, or you're going to have Jaden Grant. Yeah, good call, Carter.
I thought ball security was solid for Oregon State again. Outside of that fumble on the first drive that Oregon State took care of.
Well, that was a weird one too.
No concerns there in a game where we thought that turnovers could play a big role in the weather.
So what I'm curious though is who miscued that? Was that a Gulbranson or was that a Coletto mistake? Because Coletto was full of block mode and Gulbranson was handoff to Coletto mode. So I'm anxious. I'm interested to hear who. I mean, we probably won't know, but what call was. I'm going to go with Coletto just because I know he doesn't make many mistakes.
That's a question that you're probably better suited to answer, because you would have gotten to see the replay a couple of times in stadium. I only got to see it the once, but in all, a game where a lot went right for Oregon State. To be frank, it was just a couple of really glaring weaknesses, which of course, no semblance of a passing game right now. And this is not just a one game issue. This is a trend. It's a concerning trend that I don't know. I guess, Angie, how do you begin to try to bounce back from a game like that, where you throw for 87 yards, where your leading receiver has If I've got it pulled up, I think 22 yards. No, 15 yards. Trayshawn Harrison, 5 catches, 15 yards.
Okay.
Anthony Gould had 22 on 2
Yeah.
catches. I mean, nobody is moving the ball at all in the passing game. How do you, with only 6 days to prepare for your next game, how do you begin to bounce back from something like that?
Well, the quarterbacks and the receivers have got to like have a little heart to heart here. They can't get much worse, honestly. I say that, but I guess throwing picks would be worse. But yeah, I mean, 87 yards is dismal.
Third down defense, Washington was 11 of 18, which
Yeah.
you did the math and it came out
Yeah, it's
to
like
something about 60.
61.1. Yeah, 61%, I believe. That's not good. That's got to be fixed. But I have faith in
And half of those were on like 3rd and 10.
I
There was the
know.
3rd and 24 for a touchdown. I know one of them was 3rd and 11. I think one might have been 3rd and 18. Like it was Tibesar-esque and something that through we're what 13 games into Trent Bray now, and something that we have not seen at all from him
Yeah.
is teams
Well, it
getting
seemed to go
behind the sticks
zone.
and converting.
They started going zone like on 3rd down, and they played so much better man to man. I mean, that'll be a question for Wednesday when Trent's available.
Do you think it was zone as in like we're playing prevent because it's 3rd and long, we don't want to let you get
Yeah,
behind
I mean,
10 yards, or like what's the
but
thought
Oregon
process
State.
there?
I mean, I think that's the thought process, but they haven't played well in zone all season. When they're in prevent mode, they don't play well at all. I'd rather keep them aggressive and knock down the ball.
Yeah, it does feel like that's where Oregon State's pass defense is its best. One more thing before we move on, penalties.
Yeah.
I thought Oregon State had kind of cleaned that up, but 9 for 81 yards. To be fair, Washington had 9 for 97, so it's not like it was this lopsided, like huge advantage to the Huskies. It wasn't.
And to be fair, we had Michael Mothershed, who loves to throw flags.
That's very true. Oh, we didn't even talk about the officiating in this game.
So bad.
For one quarter, I counted 5 mistakes in the first quarter, and I said this cannot possibly get any worse. And sure enough, it actually did as the game went on.
During the live game thread, I can't even tell you how many times people were getting frustrated with the officiating.
Just absolutely ridiculous.
It has
stuff.
to be addressed, and yeah, it's horrible. Like
Just
to the point where we were watching NFL last night, and my husband said something about, well, isn't that pass interference? Or I'm like, I don't even know anymore what a pass interference call is, because what the Pac-12 has done to me, they've ruined me.
I think by the end of
holding was, I thought I knew.
I think by the end of that game, there were 5 I don't even know how you say it, like misenunciations or whatever. Like 5 things were misannounced, whether it was a penalty being assessed to a player that A, is not on the roster, or B, wasn't on the field. That happened a couple of times in the first quarter alone. The timeout, the phantom timeout that Jonathan Smith said after the game and doubled down today, I did not call timeout. They just assumed I wanted it and basically called it for me, as Damian Martinez is about to break off a 60-yard touchdown. Huge play in that game that ultimately didn't cost the Beavs because they scored on that position anyways. But I mean, again, that's inexcusable stuff for an officiating crew.
If that kind of stuff was going on in the SEC, those guys would have worked past that game.
Yeah. A couple of injury notes. Everett Hayes was available. Of course, Oregon State's kicker, who's been out with a groin injury. He was available for field goals, Jonathan Smith said. They just elected not to use him because of the aggressive play style. But it's not like they didn't have trust in him, or they didn't think he could kick through the wind. I mean, the wind did factor into those decisions, but it was like, it wasn't a, hey, we don't trust him, he's not healthy kind of thing. It was just, we're going to play aggressively. He did get it on kickoffs though. So good to see Everett Hayes back in the mix for the first time in Pac-12 play. Joe Golden on the defensive line did not return, even though we had heard that he was getting closer and closer. So potentially this week.
He's day-to-day.
And then since we're recording this on a Monday, I guess we can update a couple of things that Jonathan Smith said earlier in the day. No update on Chance Nolan's status, which to me means that he's practicing, but not in full. And actually, Trey Lowe is getting closer to returning. So maybe we see him by season's end, get back in that running back rotation, preserve a redshirt or medical hardship year. And it'd be good to see him get back into that mix, even though I don't necessarily know that they, quote unquote, need his production right now.
Yeah.
Let's touch on our keys to the game and get out of here. How's that sound?
That sounds great. So My key for offense was run the ball, and I am going to say they did a good job with that.
Yeah, I mean, 40 attempts, I'd say that's great as far as volume. 175 yards, solid. The 2 touchdowns, sure, like you like it, but maybe not in the absence of passing touchdowns. If you're
Yeah.
not going to score through the air, you got to do it on the ground. So
And
2 touchdowns is fine, but not
the
within
only
the
downside,
context
though,
of,
too, is that Washington really stymied the run second half.
yeah. My key
Carter?
offensively was to protect the pocket, and that Ben Gulbranson had to move around and get out of the pocket if necessary. I said this just because Oregon State was going up against the best pass rushing team in the Pac-12. Only 1 sack on Ben. It was a rough one, to be fair. He lost 14 yards on 3rd and long, deep in his own territory, a play where you cannot take a sack, and he did. So it was a costly one for sure, but only 1. And that's better than I expected, to be fair. And he actually he ran for, even with that, I think his game long numbers, the rushing yards weren't terrible because he had positive runs of 2 and 5. One of them for first down. The other was I'm under pressure, I'm going to escape the pocket, and he made something of it. And that's one thing that Ben is sneaky good at in his game. He will never get credit for it, and we can argue maybe he shouldn't, because it's not like he's breaking defenses down or anything. But he does have that ability to get out of the pocket, and I think we saw him do that. So
yeah, he's not
it's a resounding.
Mannion-esque.
It's a yes for
Yes.
me as far as
Yes.
did Oregon State accomplish that key to the game.
Okay, and so we both had a similar defensive key. I wanted to see pressure on Penix, and that was a resounding no. We had no
not.
pass rush. Oregon State had no real pass rush to speak of. You had generate pocket pressure.
Didn't even do that.
No,
because no quarterback hurries in the official stat total. I thought the pass rush was frankly horrific. It just was non-impactful at all against a veteran line that has some guys who have proven to be very good in pass protection. Jonathan Smith said that too. He's like, we can sit here and talk all day about what we didn't do, but like, to be fair, we played against a good team.
Yeah.
You
and
have
against a good quarterback.
Washington
You have to give them credit. Yeah.
But no, I mean, at the end of the day, the only thing you can control is your own production, and Oregon State just did not produce in the pass rush at all.
No. And so Monday night, Carter, guess what tonight is? The return of.
Do we even talk about this before we get out of here? Does anybody want to know that men's basketball is back?
Men's basketball is back. 9:00. I will probably not make it through the whole game. I'm just going to say it.
Yeah.
No official game thread. If you're in the lodge, talk about it. Carter and I will kind of return to basketball centric after football season.
Yeah, there's only so much we can do right now, and I'm certainly not about to drive down to Corvallis for a 9 p.m. tip. I expect coverage of this men's basketball team across the board to be really down until they start winning games and start playing games at realistic times of the day. They've got some. I mean, 9 p.m. to open a season after you won 3 games. I expect maybe 2,000 people tops.
Maybe.
To be at Gill, and about 95% of those will be students. So
yeah.
But if you do want basketball coverage this season, we will have it at BeaverBlitz. It's just we are totally swamped with football right now, and men's basketball is still in prove it mode in our books. Anything else you want to add, Angie?
No, I'm excited to see a bounce back. I'm heading down. I will be there this weekend, parents' weekend, or I hear dad's weekend, but I will be down. Eric's going down.
I believe I'll be there too, as per usual at Reser Stadium on Saturday, 6 p.m. kickoff, Oregon State versus California. We're going to be back to preview that game, most likely with Jackson Moore, a great friend of the pod, because he covers and publishes for about half the teams in this league, it seems like. We'll probably get him to join us on Thursday. But until then, you can follow her on Twitter at Angie Machado 1. You can follow me at Carter Bahns, and we'll talk to you on Thursday for another episode of the Damn Podcast.